Good evening, everyone. You're very welcome to this evening's webinar delivered by the Down GAA Coaching and Games Department. Just before we start off this evening's presentation, could we just go over a couple of housekeeping rules? Could we ask that everybody ensures that their microphone is kept on mute for the duration of this evening's presentations? Additionally, if you could all turn off your cameras, that would be a big help. We will be utilising the chat functions throughout the course of this evening's presentation. So if at any stage you have a question that you would like to submit to any of our deliverers this evening, feel free to fire it into the chat box there, and we'll endeavour to get through as many as we can. We're extremely grateful to everybody who has registered this evening. We've had a great uptake, and we've had a lot of very positive and thought-provoking questions contributed this evening, which again we will put to our guest speakers and also to the panel as a whole towards the end of this evening's events. I'm just going to hand over now to Crokes, our County Coaching Officer, who will lead or introduce our first speaker this evening. I would advise everybody on the call this evening that recording has already started. Carl, if you would like to take over from there.
Sure, Connor. Thanks and welcome everyone to this evening's webinar as we get closer to a welcome return to play. I'm sure everyone's itching to get back onto the field, and it's great to have a bit of sunshine. Purpose tonight is to reinforce the need to create a positive environment for our children to develop and flourish, leaning on the vast experience and knowledge of all three of our contributors here this evening. So it's grateful that they're able to give up their time. I'm sure they're sick and tired of this format as well, but we are privileged to have a great lineup here this evening, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of it. Probably looking at three key things, three key areas. There's loads of areas, across juvenile development, but we've probably honed in on structures and creating that environment. It probably starts from your club in terms of what way your club is structured, looking at the playing aspect and the players and creating that environment for the players. And it's easy to get in the mindset of adults and how we expect the children to be learning and what's good for them. So it's probably looking at what would be the optimal environment for our children to play in, and also the coach's perspective. So how do we engage, recruit, retain, and also develop our coaches into best practice and leaning towards a positive environment for our children to flourish. So it's great to have three leading lights within. I hope they don't mind me saying this, but in terms of juvenile development and coaching, you probably not get any better across these islands. And we'll get into a bit more in terms of what our contributors have achieved and what they're involved in currently. So the format for tonight, it is a fairly swift program here. There's a lot to cover. It's probably going to be an hour and a quarter. We'll try and stick to that as best we can. We will have a 10 to 15 minute presentation from each of our contributors. There will be a short Q&A after each contributor, and then at the end there will be a quick fire Q&A across the panel, and hopefully most of these that have registered for tonight will still be on the call at that stage. So fasten your seatbelts, listen to what we hope will be an interesting next hour and a quarter, and hopefully you will be able to take some nuggets away with you and try and implement them into your own clubs. So first up, we have Paraic McDonald, who's been a driving force behind coaching at Kilmacud, Crokes in Dublin for the past 20 years. A native of Castleblaney, former Monaghan footballer and hurler, Paraic has overseen some of the Dublin development since moving to Dublin, some of the development squads from their emergence in the late 90s, with many players moving on to great things in terms of the Dublin seniors. He's coached Dublin minors and has also used a sports management degree from UCD to great effect as he developed innovative coaching structures and programs within Kilmacud to the force they are today. So to talk us through briefly on the broad theme of growing a club with a focus on structures and coaching philosophy, I would welcome Paraic McDonald from Kilmacud Crokes in Dublin. Thank you.
Thanks, Connor and Carol. Can you hear me there okay?
All good, Paraic.
Perfect. Thanks again for the invitation this evening to come and speak to your clubs and coaches. Hope I can add value. I hope that everybody who tunes in this evening maybe can take away one or two things, take them back to their clubs or their own coaching to prove themselves. I am going to, let's just see. Okay. So I'm going to look at sort of growing a club and the coaching philosophy that underpins that in terms of 3 Ps. I'm going to look at the principles that back it up. I'm going to look at the planning process and sort of giving time to plan. And I'm going to look at people and how you develop your people. There's sort of 3 or 4 slides to back that up. So I suppose before you start everything, you sort of come up with your principles, your guiding principles. And I know the GE has done a lot of work on this over the last number of years. Certainly the games conference over a couple of years has sort of had that theme where your philosophy, your principles, your vision, what your mission is, and that then your behavior should reflect all of those, and the decisions that you make along the way should reflect your philosophy and vision. So when I look at it, I look at some of the guiding principles that sort of has guided my role in Kilmacud Crokes over the last number of years. And these have evolved with time, and it's sort of, a lot of it has come from, I suppose, the amount of research that is out there now and sort of best practice. And certainly in the last 20 years, that's one of the big changes in the GAA, that everything now is sort of evidence-based and researched. And we've got a lot of sports scientists coming out of universities and a lot of work done on this. So I think the bar is continuing to be raised. So quickly, again, this is core, and this is I'll touch on the new GAA player pathway shortly. But one of their core values, and it's a core value I've sort of had for a long time now, is sort of as many players as long as possible. And with the numbers we're sort of dealing with in some of the Dublin clubs and certainly Kilmacud Crokes, the challenge is then, when you've 100 kids at every age group, 100 plus, and you've varying abilities, can you, make sure that everybody is treated equally and that it's just not all focused on your A team, that kids, maybe sort of late developers, early developers, when you're comparing them, maybe some of the kids who need a little bit longer just to get their feet underneath them, are you giving enough attention to them and giving due course to them to help them? Another principle would be the players at the centre of everything. I suppose if you have a triangle of the club, the coach, and the parents, that the player is in the middle of all that, and that everything is with the player's focus, that you're focused on, you're making the decisions with the player's best interest in mind. And there is a lot of decisions as you go through the pathway and up through, in terms of, one of the things I think one of the lads are going to touch on tonight is streaming, and when you're picking teams and you're moving kids up and moving kids down, that you're making those decisions with the player's best interest. You need a vision. Anything you go to set out and do, you need a vision for where you want to go. And I suppose I have a vision, or I've worked off a vision of what the ideal player would be like. I took this from Ajax, about 20 plus years ago now at this stage, but TIP stands for technique, intelligence, personality, speed, and strength. I added the last one because Gaelic games is a fairly robust sort of game, and you need to be robust, and you need a certain level of strength to compete. The techniques, speaks for itself. We want kids who have all the skills on both sides of the body. The intelligence part is the need to have an understanding of the game, or the need to, have an appreciation of their role, and that's the job of the coach, is to coach them through that. P is the big one, is personality. They need to be a good team player. They need to be coachable, and they need to be able to play in a team sport. S is the speed, and that's not just speed of thought, it's speed of movement, speed of reaction, speed agility, speed acceleration, deceleration, and as I said, strength, which helps in a robust game. This is something that has come into the focus over the last number of years, and the more we sort of work off it, the more it sort of seems to be key in everything that we do. And it's the self-determination theory that Decky and Ryan, I think, in the late noughties put a lot of work into, and this sort of underpins everything that we try to do. we sort of always want to develop intrinsically motivated players and highly motivated players and players who are fully committed to us. So how do you get intrinsically motivated players? And in the self-determination theory, they talk about three things. They talk about relatedness, they talk about competency, and they talk about, I just jumped out of my head there now. Relatedness, autonomy, and competency. So competency is making them more skillful, giving them the tools to play the game. Relatedness quickly is just, being attached. Everybody wants to belong to something, belong to a club, belong to, something bigger than themselves. And the GAA is obviously very much a community-based organisation, and at the centre of the vast majority of communities that they're in. So linking that in and making sure that the kids, have role models in the club, and that they're all proud to wear the club jersey. And the last one then was autonomy, sort of giving them a say in their own direction. And I would do this right down at 9, 10, 11, 12, and giving the kids a voice in some of the stuff that do. Let them pick the warm up, let them contribute to the code of discipline or the code of behaviour. Let them contribute to developing tactics and starting that questioning at a young age. The next one is maturation, and that is, all the kids are on a different developmental pathway. They all develop at different rates. And the big one is, I suppose, they're the early developers and the late developers. And we all know the early developers who are physically, further down the line at a young age, and they're the ones that tend to dominate games at under 9 or under 11 or under 12. But all kids will reach the full maturity further down the line. And what are we doing to help that early developer? Are we just letting him rely on his physical skills at an early age and not really focusing in on developing their skills of the game or their knowledge of the game? And likewise, the late developer, are we making sure that we're keeping them involved, that they're not sort of drifting away and getting cut adrift because they're struggling maybe to contribute in a game or to get a chance to express themselves in a game? So that's the challenge for coaches, is to take both ends of the spectrum and work with them and make sure that they get brought through. The development of FMS, and a lot of work has gone into this again over the last number of years, and the GAA has recently launched their FMS policy, and a lot of work has gone in with DCU. And again, it comes back to competency. Are we giving the kids the tools to be able to compete, to be able to play? And one of those would, have they got the basic movement patterns? Are they able to run, jump, hop, skip, throw, catch, roll, tumble? All the basic movement skills that you need before you ever consider sort of trying to put in the sport-specific skills. So a lot of the work in the nursery should be focused in on developing FMS. And if you come up to look at the Kilmacud nursery at under 6 and under 7, a lot of traditionalists would say, well, I don't see much hurling going on, or I don't see much Gaelic football, or you're not playing too many matches in training. But this is where we're sort of we're doing the stuff that you have to put in as the stepping stone to that stuff that comes later on. Ask why, and I suppose as coaches, as clubs, we should always ask why, and why should be the first question. Why are we doing something? Why are you doing that? Why did you think you chose that game or that activity? And then the next question that follows that, can we do it better? And I think if clubs and coaching committees and coaches and coaching officers are always asking why, I think we always sort of challenge ourselves then to improve and look at different ways of doing things, rather than sort of the question or sort of coming up with the point that this is the way we've always done it. I think there's always room for improvement. So asking why is the first step on that. So developing the 4 C's. So the 4 C's is competency, which we've already talked about. Commitment, and again, related to being committed to something bigger than you. The other C is character and caring, and the other C is, so we've competency, confidence, character, and connection. That idea of being connected to a club and connected to something bigger than them. And lastly, our principles of play and training. So when we move up the phases, when we move into sort of 13 to 18, we're starting to, we've left behind goal games, and we're starting to learn a little bit more about the game. We're starting to try to play the game. And a lot of the principles of play come in then. So when we're teaching sort of attacking play, or we're teaching defensive play, some of the principles we talk about are width and depth and, +1s or creativity if we're talking about attack and play. So basing your sort of game plan or basing your sort of tactical approach around some of the key principles. And there's key principles of play that are common across all of Asian sports, and then there's some that are fairly unique to Gaelic football or hurling. So it's figuring out what principles of play and then building your sort of game and your activities around that. And also principles of training, which is sort of the basic stuff of getting fit, your fit principle, frequency, intensity, time, type, specificity, to have an understanding of that. So when you're plotting out a yearly program for an under 14 team, an under 16 team, or a minor team, that you're taking in some of those considerations. So they talk about methods. There's many methods to do. There's many ways of developing tactical play. There's many ways of developing, skills. But I think the principles, once you've settled on your core principles, you can develop your methods from that. So the next P we'll talk about is planning and preparation. And again, I would have worked off a pathway sort of based on the Istvan Bali model over the last 20 years. I was lucky enough we had him in Kilmacud Crokes about 20 years ago when he was sort of brought into Ireland. He worked with a lot of the government bodies and supporting Ireland to develop a pathway. And it's a lot of research since that has come out to say that there's weaknesses in it because it's very much a linear and a step-by-step model. But as we know, kids' pathways, development pathways are not linear. There's peaks and troughs and plateaus and reverse and all that when you map out an individual's one. But I still think it has served us well in Kilmacud Crokes over the years in terms of making sure that we're focused in on the child at that particular phase, and that the stuff that we were doing was suitable for that phase. So when we talk about phases, there was 5 phases in the Bali model. And it does correlate to the new GA1, which I'll show in a second. But the first phase was our nursery phase. So when the kids come into Kilmacud at under 5 and under 6 and under 7, before they graduate on to Go Games, it was the fundamental phase, and our nursery is built around that. And as I said, a huge emphasis over the last number of years on the development of FMS skills to make sure that when they're coming out at 8, 9, that they have those broad, basic movement skills or basic sport skills. And then it's our job then to layer the sport-specific skills on top of that. We then move into Go Games and Go Games from under 8 to under 12, I suppose, in Kilmacud Crokes. And Bali called that the learning to train. And again, that's small-sided games like Go Games, the model that has come out in the last 15 years. Small-sided games, child-friendly pitch sizes, child-friendly equipment, and child-friendly rules and development rules. And then when we graduate out of Go Games, you move into full 15-a-side, or what people talk about normal games. We call it the Féile phase. Féile has now moved obviously to under 15, so it sort of ties in with it. So you have a sort of 3-year sort of focus on this phase. And then we moved on to the minor phase, and the last phase then is into adult football. So there's 5 distinct phases there as the players come through, and each with sort of a different focus, with a different sort of guiding principles. In each phase, you sort of break it down into the technical skills, the tactical approach, the physical fitness, or the sort of athleticism or athletic development. And then you have your psychosocial, so your psychology, your mental fitness, and then the social aspect of that as well. So stuff like, diet and nutrition and preparation. We talk about the 4 C's. I've already mentioned that in the last. So the player pathway, the idea is it was to meet the needs of each player at each phase of the pathway as we progress through the club, and we develop those 4 C's: competence, confidence, connection, and character. I mentioned that the GA pathway has been brought out in the last, I suppose, 6 months, or it's been worked on over the last year, and it's just launched there a couple of weeks ago. Michael Dempsey from Kilkenny Laois and Brian Cuthbert from Cork, with 2 principals involved with that, with a committee in with a committee in Croke Park. The guiding philosophy that behind that is a few of the key philosophies behind it is club is core. It's a player-centered approach. It's a quality coaching experience that kids enjoy coming down to the club and have a good, positive experience. Again, connection that we've already talked about. Inclusive, again, linking into making sure that our kids of all abilities, are included and are involved, and that we We provide teams, and we provide training sessions, and we provide activities for them to be involved, and then as many players as possible for as long as possible. The 6 key attributes, the key player capacities is very much like the Bali model: your tactical, your physical, and your psychosocial. And then the game and your key coaching principles on the new pathways. It's all about enjoyment and fun, all the players involved. It has to be challenging, it has to be player centered, it has to look like the game, and there has to be constant decision making. And just a step on from this, if anybody's interested, I advise you to go look at some of the work that was done with the Leinster Council over the last couple of years on the tourist programme. And the tourist is Irish for journey, and a lot of work has gone into sort of this tourist programme, and there's a lot of resources to back it up. And it's Anya McNamara, I suppose, from DCU, who is a professor there in elite performance, was back, and she's also had an involvement in the Limerick development squads going back 10 years. And again, it's a model to add to your own sort of models that you use to develop your coaching plans, your coaching programs. I suppose to look at a little bit more closely at what we've done in Kilmacud Crokes and some of the stuff that has worked. So I look at the people and the programs. So my role, and again, I understand that not every club has the luxury of having a full-time development officer. But my role in Kilmacud Crokes, I suppose, is broadly based on two areas. It's coach focused and it's player focused. Some of the coach focused programs there, I'll let you read through them yourself, but a lot of it is obviously upskilling the coaches and coach education. Bringing in guest coaches and tutors is something we would do on a regular basis, sharing resources, having coaching committees, meeting on a regular basis, and then player focused, everything from the nursery school to our primary schools coaching of the school teams as well, primary schools blitzes, go games. We have a skills pathway and we do skills testing on a regular basis. Big thing is the underage tournaments. I know there's a lot of tournaments in the north that some of our Kilmacud Crokes teams would go on, and we also would host some of those teams in our own home tournaments. Mini All Ireland is a big event in Kilmacud Crokes, our Easter and summer camps, Schools of Excellence for under 11 to under 15, and then our TY coaching course where we get kids back involved from a coaching point of view, and they help out on our camps and our schools coaching program. Again, quote there from Stan McChrystal, who has wrote a few books now on leadership. He's an American general, and his book Team of Teams in 2015, he sort of makes the differentiation between sort of a chess mastery of all these things, we'll say, in a club, and you're trying to micromanage them. I don't think that works, and I think I like his quote that it's more like a gardener, where you're sort of developing an ecosystem, and you're tending to it, and these things will grow and flourish themselves if they get enough attention. And finally, it's really a people business. So this is, Gaelic games, coaching, developing a club. It's all about developing people and working with people. So, all right.
Paraic,
I was about to take control there, Connor.
Any of our webinars in advance would know we do try and keep them as interactive as possible, and I think it's very apt that you finished there that the people are key to the success or failings of a club. And just at this point, I think it would be right that we just gauge maybe the audience that we have with us this evening. So I'm just going to launch a quick poll here, folks, and I'll give you about 20-25 seconds to quickly fire in your response before we get into the questions directed more directly to Paraic. Yeah, so what is your role? What is your current role within your club? So if you just want to quickly type in your answer there, folks, and submit it, we get a quick overview of the target audience that we have with us this evening. Yeah, if you don't have the poll facility on your screen, folks, feel free to just fire it into the chat. Excellent. Okay, so look, we've quite a broad spread right across the various areas there. We're predominantly coach heavy this evening. Committee members, coaching officers as well, with a few additional people maybe representing other stakeholders within the club. So that's an excellent start. Paraic, in a club the size of Kilmacud Crokes, you must work on a day-to-day basis with a fierce amount of people, both from a coaching perspective, from a parental perspective, children, the whole works. And I suppose, look, you're one man there driving a huge coaching programme in a huge club in Dublin. But how important is it, Paraic, that you have the backing or the support of the executive officers or the senior officers within Kilmacud Crokes when trying to influence coaching methods or practices within the club?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's crucial. I've seen clubs over the years where maybe their focus is on the senior team might have a particularly good group of players and they're challenging for a junior championship or intermediate championship, senior championship, and a lot of the focus is on that team and making sure you ride the crest of the wave. Other times clubs are really focused on fundraising and developing facilities. And then other times, maybe through when things have gone a bit shallow on the adult success front, they start to focus in on underage. And I think it's those three things are crucial in any club, and I don't think you can sort of concentrate on one to the detriment of the other two. I think it's something that needs to be given focus at all times. So the challenge is to give them due focus, and I think part of that then is making sure that there's a place for coaching on the club executive, that it's not just all about fundraising or pitch development or facilities and that coaching is spoken about on a regular basis up at your coach executive, and that there's a couple of people who are key to coaching are up there representing it.
And Paraic, what does a coaching committee in Kilmacud Crokes, what does the makeup of a coaching committee in Kilmacud Crokes look like?
So we suppose it's made up of coaches. I would have two sort of different. The sort of four underage phases there: your nursery, your go games, and then your sort of Féile phase and your minor phase. So I would have a coaching committee for the Féile phase and the minor and the minor phase, and I have another coaching committee for the nursery and the go games, because the stuff that's spoken about at those two different committees are the minor coach doesn't really want to hear about the problems down at the nursery or how best we're developing FMS and like that. The nursery coach doesn't really want to hear about how the minor championship is going. So there are the two distinct sort of agendas and sort of topics that are spoken about there. And again, we're very clear that it's really focused in on coaching and developing our player pathway and developing our skills pathway, and talking about our coaching plans and how we review our coaching plans and skills testing. And we don't talk about fundraising, we don't talk about facilities, we don't talk about pitches or jerseys or anything like that. People are giving up their time 1 hour a month for a coaching meeting. You have to make sure that you're adding value to that, and because we really focus in on that, we tend to get a good turnout at it, and people are willing to give up their time.
Perfect. Paraic, just on that note then, I'm going to launch 1 second quick poll before Carl takes over. So again, just in relation to the aspect of the coaching committee, just with consideration to your own club.
Yeah, Paraic, another question's come in, probably a wee bit related to the first question from Connor. You've discussed there are a few models and pathways, and you could broaden that out into leadership and management theory, and also and you're taking a lot of information on board as a full-time officer within the club. Do you think clubs put enough emphasis on coaching games, because it is a complex area? There's a lot to take on. There's a lot of things maybe that are probably less challenging to take forward. Do you think clubs put enough emphasis on coaching in games within their normal operating or the way they?
Yeah, I suppose what I would know would be Dublin GAA probably at this stage, and I know that because there's a lot of full-time officers, full-time GPOs, there is due consideration given it to, because you have a full-time officer who's able to do that. That's not always the case in clubs, and I look back at my own club, Castleblaney Fogs, and we've gone through a lean period there in terms of senior championships, and there's been a huge emphasis then over the last 10 years plus on the underage, and a lot of work is done on that. And it is, to go back to where a club like Castleblaney was successful, is you go through a lean period. To get back to that level takes 10, 15 years. So it's a process that sort of people buy into. Now, the same person won't be there to drive that a lot of the time, the whole way through. So it's about bringing new people in all the time, and it's get trust in people and sort of, in Crokes, I always say that each year when we bring in the next group of under sixes in the nursery, you never know what sort of the parent that's coming along with them, what skill set they have and what their background is, and what they can contribute to the club. So, it's nearly a I'll look and see.
Absolutely. Paraic, listen, thank you very much for your contribution. You're going to stay with us, obviously, towards the end of the evening. We'll grill you once again, so we will. But you can grab yourself a cup of tea there and rest easy for the next half an hour or so anyway.
No problem, Connor. Thank you.
That's great. Paraic, just moving on to our next contributor, former All-Ireland winner, All-Star Aidan O'Rourke, who hails from the Dromintee club in Armagh. I suppose my experience of Aidan probably goes back to, I think his biggest achievement as a coach was taking a Chinese team of complete amateurs to Shanghai, I think it was. And I was his assistant coach, and I think that was his biggest achievement to date. And I learned a lot from him on that China trip, I can tell you. But Aidan has been probably working as a coach, as an educator across a range of age groups over the last number of years, been involved in club, third level with Queens, inter-county spells with Kildare, Louth, Down, and his own native Armagh. And more recently, Aidan has been involved in driving his own club in terms of the juvenile structure, and also involved in steering the Orchard Academy, which is set up to drive forward Armagh in terms of the county teams. And he's also dipped his toes in the water, as many as have maybe seen or read, in terms of journalism. And he has a highly popular coaching opinion column with RT Sports. So it's great to have Aidan with us here this evening, and he's going to touch on more about the playing environment of Best Fit. So it's more looking at the lens of the player, and talk through a wee bit and lift the lid on some of the practices within his own club. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Did a bit of hoking about before I came on, so you could have found a Down t-shirt, but unsuccessful. Don't last too long around these parts, those Down logos. First of all, I suppose thanks to Carl and Connor for inviting me along. I skillfully avoid these in terms of presenting as much as I can, but some traps you can't get out of. So what I'm going to talk to you about this evening is my own club Dromintee's journey over the last 4 or 5 years from a player development perspective at underage. One thing I'm very conscious of is that our experience is going to be different from everybody else's experience in the room here. I don't for 1 minute think that everything we do, anybody else should do, or that I'm going to lay out a blueprint for you for your own club. When I'm tuned into something like this myself, I'm always looking for things that I can steal or mold, but always very conscious that our environment is different from everybody else's. So no apologies for it. I'm going to tell you about our environment and our experience, but yours is going to be different. And I suppose if there is 1 or 2 things that you like the sound of as we travel through here, just be aware of your own club's culture and the experience and skills that you have within the people there. Geography, demographics, all of those things change from club to club. So when I was sitting down to start to look at this, as first thing I did was look up the meaning of the words of the question. So creating means bringing something into existence, and that's not strictly what any of us do, really. There's very few, if any of us, are creating something from nothing when we get involved in trying to either coach or develop coaching structures within our own club. We all have foundations to build on, whether we like them or not. And I suppose the first task is to decide what you do like, or what you think you can build on, what to keep and what to get rid of. So certainly in terms of context in the Dromintee scenario, our background is very important and speaks probably to our identity, which is the first area I want to look at this evening. Our background is a club, we're the oldest club in Armagh. Some people say Ulster, but there's Sony and Calvin disputing that. but certainly our existence hasn't been that straightforward. For the first century or so of our existence, it was a case of the club trying to field and stay relevant, and slipped in and out of being affiliated and not. So it was really only in the 90s that our club first became a senior club and started challenging then for senior championships, and we had a purple patch at senior level in that period. The reason I'm telling you that is that we are now in a period of bringing younger players through where we don't have a lot of experience with coaches who have been involved in success, either as coaches themselves or players, and that impacts our starting culture, what we can do from a coaching perspective, and how we have to frame everything as we go forward. I'm coaching officer now, I think 4 years, since 2017. I head up our coaching committee, which is a very small group of coaches who do a serious amount of work around the club and lead a wider group of coaches. We are very much at the other end of the scale from Kilmacud, I suppose, and Paraic's experience. We're a rural club, and every child and every coach is a prisoner. If we can get you in the gate at all, we'll be holding on to you. So the starting challenge for me 4 years ago was twofold. The first task was, how can we bring more players through to play adult or senior football for the club? And secondly, how do we raise the quality of the overall player that we produce consistently? So that frames everything we do, really, and we do return to those questions periodically in terms of where we're bringing our coaching and our philosophy. And all of that feeds to our identity as a set of coaches, and as a club. Some strengths in all of that, some weaknesses, but as long as you're aware of all of those as a starting point, then you can manage all of those. Simple starting point for us, I remember sitting down with a blank piece of paper and writing this on it, is what do the kids want? And that's different from what parents want. I'm sure you're all acutely aware of that. I, like most people, got involved at the juvenile side of the club because I have kids coming to that age, and I wanted to create a culture and environment for them that would help them to develop, but always conscious of just understanding exactly what the kids want. And when you do understand that, and it often is different from what parents envisage, there's a very important piece of education and communication with parents. So from a very simple practical perspective, the delivery of coaching, when some parents will want more games and they want it to be more competitive, and it's trying to let them understand that that's not necessarily what's best for the kids at any one time, because ultimately parents are the biggest influence on kids. For me, there are three reasons why kids come to the club. Social reason, participative, just to be involved in playing the games, and the competitive side of things. And kids generally fall in one or two of those categories, and all of those are valuable in terms of retaining players and bringing more players through to adult. You have to be attentive to each of those three genesis in terms of where kids are coming from. Social thing is a really important aspect, and I'm going to touch on that a wee bit more as we go. So from our perspective, to grow our identity, we had to try and increase our attachment to, first of all, the kids, but really that's done through the kids' families. And we're not in a big area. Every family has some sort of connection to the club, but we had to revitalize those connections if they were lost, or try and create new connections with some families who maybe had moved out of the area. And it seems odd sometimes to have to try and work hard at attaching people to the club, but that is something that we have had to work hard at, and something we like to think we've been reasonably successful with. One key thing in that is to promote everything that you do as well as you can do it. We're lucky to have somebody involved in the social media side of things who's mad keen to promote everything, and that does grow your footprint in the parish or the community, and that encourages other people to get involved. The best thing that we did in this area very early in that 4-year journey was We host, some of you may be aware, we host annual blitzes at various underages at our club, and they were quite small at that stage. So we immediately identified that as a possible vehicle of getting more people involved. The blitzes have grown over the last 4 years into something of a monster. There are some of the biggest tournaments in Ulster at each of those age grades. But what that has done, it has given us the opportunity to hook people who don't coach, don't really have an interest in the games, but want to support their kids. That has given us the opportunity to create blitz committees with expertise and opportunities for people to volunteer who don't normally have that opportunity. So that's just an example of how you try and create that connection, and something that has been very important for us over the last 3 or 4 years in particular. Making all of that sustainable, that's probably the biggest challenge. And the reason why we work so hard on our club identity is that we need more people to be involved all the time in every aspect of running the club. As I said, every person who's in the gate is a prisoner, and we try and find a role for everybody. Ultimately, everything is about people. No matter who they are, if they put their hand up, we find a role for them. Administrators obviously are central to creating opportunities here for everyone. Coaches create the environment that kids are going to come and play in. And all of that has a huge effect on how you develop players. So from that perspective, as an example of how do you fit people in, the coaching teams that we put around our underage teams typically have a manager, a lead coach, and support coaches. Now, that manager might not have any coaching experience, might not have any interest in developing their coaching experience, but they will have organizational and communication skills, and they'll pick up almost the role of a traditional rugby manager. Our lead coach will be our most experienced coach, and he will be charged with creating the coaching environment in the first instance, but also leading out support coaches who might be people with various interests and experiences that can help bring the kids forward. All of that's very important for us. And then that connects back to creating the environment that we want, looking at those three sort of meanings in terms of why kids come to the club in the first place. That allows us to create an environment that supports all of that. The first element of kids I mentioned is the social, and the kids that have come because they're interested in the social aspect of things. That's the majority in the first instance. And they come because all of their friends are coming. There's a bit of crack. There's a buzz around the pitch whenever the underage teams are all there, those younger grades. And that's a challenge that all of our coaches have been given to ensure that social opportunity remains throughout their journey with us. Participation element of things, again, absolutely crucial. And we have to be conscious of creating environments for kids to play with sufficient time and space the entire way through their journey. And that goes right up through all of our underage grades. So our coaches have to be conscious of kids who just want to be there, be part of it, want to work on their skills, feel part of the team, and aren't necessarily driven by the last aspect, which is that competitive element. And we address that through sort of a golden thread for us, which is our coaching values. And for me, this is something that sometimes gets lost in some of the more modern approaches to developing underage players. There is nothing wrong with competitive nature. It has to be nurtured. You have to give those kids the opportunity to compete against each other, against other like-minded kids, because ultimately that edge that those kids carry naturally will be very valuable going forward. You can't ignore it for 4 or 5 years and then try to ignite it if the kids are still in the club, that is, at a later date. So our coaching environment tries to nurture all three of those elements, and that is a challenge at times, but we work hard to try and do that. The last two elements are compatible. Participation outlook and a competitive outlook can fit very, very well together if it's done properly. It requires a lot of diligence from the coaches, a lot of planning, and a lot of attention to detail, but it can be done well. And in particular, it needs a lot of good communication with the kids so that they understand what's happening and why, and that's an extension in terms of communication with the parents as well. For me, that's something that gets lost at times, but that is fundamental to how we develop players. And again, this is our environment. I'm not pushing that on anyone, but that's certainly our outlook on it. Final piece for me then is role models. This is really important, and this is not something I started out having a lot of value on, but I learned the value of it as we went. And these role models obviously come in all shapes and sizes, but it starts with the coaches. Ultimately, kids learn, all of their behaviours are learned, and we have to set a template of behaviour for them, for parents, and in particular for ourselves, that leaves no doubt as to what's expected from the kids. None of that interferes with fun or the ability to come and have a good time. But what we want to do is create an environment where everyone can practice their skills, play the game, and have fun doing it, and nobody gets interfered with because other people can't behave themselves, and that's very important for us. I would go so far as to say, if coaches can't lead by example with that, that's the one thing that really disqualifies them from involvement with our coaching our kids. And I say that as a player with one of the worst tempers and dispositions on the field in terms of reacting to referees and opponents and all the rest. I've had to leave that firmly at the door, and you have to set the very best example for kids, or their learned behaviour will not be what you need in the long term. Next step on all that is idols. We have plenty within our own club. Aaron McKay, who's on the slide there, is probably the leading light for us at the moment. Plays full back for Armagh. Brilliant young fella in terms of giving up his time, coming taking coaching sessions, goes into our primary schools when he has time. And we spend a lot of time trying to push the club senior side of things, make sure that it's in the younger lads' consciousness that they're looking up to the club seniors and want to get there someday. And then obviously there's an extension with that to Armagh as well, that they want to get that far down, and they have idols and people to look up to there as well. And we're proactive about that. We will talk about games that are on the TV at the weekend, might take the tablet and show a Lee Keegan tackle and block to the lads before a session starts. People to look up to are fundamental, very, very important in terms of how the kids continue to develop. And then the final part, don't like using this term because it's a theoretical term, but cultural architects. These are the kids that start to develop from your own environment, that set good standards, that don't necessarily have to be your best players, but that are really hard workers, that do everything, exactly as they're asked, work diligently on their weaknesses, people that you can hold up. And we do hold them up. We praise them in front of the group. We use them as examples, and ultimately what that does is it encourages others to mimic them and try and push on. I'm just going to use one practical example. The young fella in the bottom left square, it's a kid I've coached since he was 9 years of age. He's now 13. Until he was 12, he was playing our second or third team at each of those age grades. Great young fella with a great attitude. Physically, nothing would come together for him. Skills were always just a couple of percentage points off, but always a brilliant attitude. And in the last 12 months, just before lockdown, just caught up with his own body, got a handle on his own skills, and he went to local school as a first year, started on the second year team, playing centrally on the 13 team last summer. Really good example of all of that. And asked his mum's permission to use his picture this evening. So I'm just going to finish with how I started. No real secrets to anything we do, certainly. Our solutions might not be your solutions, but I suppose as a summary, it's all about good people, and that means the people that you put around the kids and how you address them, how you nurture them, how you coach them as people, on top of how you coach them as footballers. Treat them with respect, treat them as individuals, and take an individual approach. and that's as much as you can do where that takes you. Sometimes depends on your resources, but certainly that's our approach, and hope that so you get something from that journey.
Aidan, thank you so much. Really insightful information there, particularly from a rural-based club background, which will resonate strongly with a lot of the clubs, or particularly our down clubs here. Aidan, just one wee point maybe that I would like to ask you. If I'm not mistaken, Dromintee children would largely come from Dromintee Primary School and maybe Jonesborough Primary, that area. Would that be correct? From a club perspective, do you have much or any presence in those schools in terms of developing school club links, and what value do you place on that?
Yeah, so that's one of the first things I would have addressed when I came in as coaching officer. So initially, we run a full day of coaching every week for the primary school. So we have a medium-sized primary school, Dromintee Primary School, which has about 180 kids in it, and then a small primary school, Jonesborough, which is about 80, depending on from year to year. And first thing we did was try and bring club coaching to them. So our solution was 1 day a week. We ran this for 12 months with volunteers, where we organised a rota of coaches to go in and take each of the classes over the course of that 1 day. We've moved it on a bit, sourced a bit of funding, and now we employ a coach to go in 1 day a week into both primary schools and deliver coaching.
Perfect. And just on that note, I'm going to launch another wee quick poll, again, just related to the whole school club link area. Folks, if you take 10 seconds, quickly submit your response, and then we'll get back to questioning Aidan a bit more.
Yeah, I'll maybe come in here, Connor's question.
Yeah, certainly.
I can certainly vouch for Aidan's temperament as a player. I think I experienced yourself and I think it was your brothers were at a sevens tournament, and I felt their wrath as all at that tournament. And so I thought I would imagine. I think it was in Castlewellan. I don't know if you can remember that. I think you were thrown out for bad behaviour. But sure. In terms of it's probably linked to the pathway which Paraic touched on in. So is there a coaching structure that's consistent throughout the club from under 6 upwards? Are the principles broadly the same, or do you tweak them to suit the particular age groups? And the last part of that question is your approach to coaching boys and girls. What would your thoughts be on that?
Yeah, so we have 3 coaching principles which apply to all of the teams. Now, they mean slightly different things at different age groups. So for an under 8, for example, skills at speed means something completely different from a minor. But we do have that golden thread running through, and we sit down with all of our coaching teams at the start of the year and work out what that means for the delivery of coaching, what exactly we want the kids to learn that year, what should they be proficient at halfway through by the time we get to the end. And that's with a view to developing a certain type of player by the time you get to 15 or 16. In terms of boys and girls, I probably have a pretty fixed view on this. I believe they should play together, train together, play matches together for as long as possible. So the cut-off point now used to be under 12.5 in Armagh. Now it's under 11.5 when Go Games finishes. And I believe girls benefit in the long run from training and playing with boys. Now there are issues around that. Some of the girls and some of the parents are not keen on the extra contact that some of that brings. But for me, and the practical examples within our club all stand this up. The longer girls play with boys, the better their development long term.
Okay, that's great.
Aidan, just you briefly mentioned there around the tournaments, obviously, that Dromintee have hosted over the last number of years, which are frequented, by a large number. At what stage, Aidan, within Dromintee does winning become important at juvenile level? And there's maybe a perception out there within clubs that we become fixated with winning at a much too early a stage, and it's probably a hot topic for discussion across most clubs. So, within your own clubs, or within your own opinion, at what stage should we start focusing on the winning?
Well, I suppose I'll summarise it by saying I'm now coaching under 15, so I've coached right up from under 9, let's say, right up through. And at no stage have I ever mentioned winning a game to a player. We coach the player, coach him to develop as well as he can, all of his skills, decision making, and obviously then that plugs into playing on a team. Yeah. Now, for players to do that, to develop themselves and to successfully plug into a team, the end result of all of that is that you get better and you beat teams that you play, and that's an undeniable fact. And trying to steer away from that or teach kids that the end result doesn't matter I think it's a bit silly in my view. Kids are driven, some of them are driven by winning, and that's fine, and that's up to themselves. But certainly we don't coach kids to win games. We coach them to be better, coach them to how to be team players. And if that ends up that they win games by 20 points, lose by 20 points, draw, none of that's important. What we focus on is what they need to focus on individually to continue to develop.
Aidan, thank you very much. Carl, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Aidan. You like your tea there, so you might have a chance there to boil your kettle before the final discussion there. I think we're okay for time. I think we had planned to wrap up at about 8:45 there, so give or take 5 or 10 minutes, I think we should be spot on there. I'd like to finally introduce our last contributor, so the third of 3 contributors this evening here. Most of you will probably have heard of the next contributor. Is a former teacher, coach, master tutor, believe it or not, author of 5 publications, and I did promise to give him a plug on his new publication, which is available via Amazon, The Troubleshooting Coach, and I think there's another book due out later this year as well. So he's definitely filling his retirement well, by sticking with the whole narrative around coaching, and it's safe to say that he would be regarded as one of the coaching gurus on the island here, and it has been involved at the forefront of coaching, not only in Gaelic games but in other sports as well. So Philip Kerr has also been involved in the recent coach development plan for Derry, which maybe some of you have seen, was launched last year, and is still a key figure that has contributed to the transformation of the overall scaffolding within Marifelt, O'Donovan and Ross's there, who have probably seen the benefits of that in terms of translating to senior level over recent years as well, and a lot of work has gone in to that project over the last 10 years or so. So it's great to have Philip, and he's highly in demand, and it's great that I know he does turn down a lot of these requests. So it's great to have Philip here with us for a short while, but hopefully will be a valuable insight into some of Philip's teaching and his practice as well. So Philip's going to touch on just getting the best out of our coaches, and he's going to take the stage now for the next 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll wrap up with a few questions at the end with all 3 contributors. So I'll hand over to Philip now. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So this is just keep this screen for a while. There's about 7 titles come up on that. Yep. But really, the story is about how we evolved over a number of years. I'm not directly involved with the club now, other than doing sort of what you might call unofficial coach developer, and it is very much unofficial. But the headhunting bit was, we very quickly got away from the hand raised at the AGM. I'll take the under 14s. That's great, Joe. Thanks very much. And sometimes that worked out, and sometimes, a lot of the time, it didn't. But we deliberately, or the club deliberately, headhunts people, and has done over the years, all within the club, not outside. And they try and pick up somebody who has a coaching background. They'll be qualified, of course, in most cases, but a bit like Aidan said, maybe a good manager, a good people person. And those people are literally headhunted, and they go to the houses looking for them, etc., convince them over a while to come and take a particular team. If there's a bit of competition over that team, yes, there are interviews and whatnot, and maybe we try and get the 2 to work together. But the hunted the person that we were hunting then is required to become the hunter as such, in that we ask that person to go put a team around him. So put a team of coaches around you. So I'm thinking of 2 years ago, say, Enda Quinn taking the under 16 or the under 14s, and Enda very much a manager and saying straight away, look, I'm not a coach, but I'll get a good coach with me. So he goes seeking Murdo O'Brien in the club, who hasn't done much coaching, but has just finished from senior football. Turns out he's a treat, an absolute treat. So we do a bit of that sort of, like, let's find these people. They're about, let's find them. There's plenty in the club here. Reasonably big town, sitting halfway between Derry and Belfast and getting bigger. So we can get some of these people. Throw up the second one there, the adult and child one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, go. Right, so a big drive with us is to get the adult-child ratio as low as possible, particularly in the younger years. So if we're looking at under what would they be now, 5s and 7s and 9s and all that sort of that they're switching to now, but the 6s, 8s and 10s, we don't want it to drive down that adult-child ratio as much as possible. You know, literally, if you're there with P1s, the likes of that, and you're in Meadowbank Arena or you're out, you're nearly looking at a 1-2 or a 1-1 at times. Could be a parent that's just there with them. And they're what we used to call our copy me coaches. So one coach would be doing the leading, and there wouldn't be much required of any of the others except to copy what that coach was doing and then make a couple of coaching points. And that's how you eventually, over the years, got people into coaching as such. Marty Donnelly, a fellow in our town, would have gone along to all the car windows when parents were pulled in and dropping their kids off and maybe sitting for a while. He'd have gone along and knocked the window and get somebody to come out and give him a hand with just throwing a ball to somebody or whatever. And he used to call them as accidental coaches. They were there to sit and read the newspaper, and accidentally they got involved in coaches. And very often they stuck with it. And when they found out that it wasn't rocket science and they weren't required to take a team for a year. But as Marfelt has grown, we've picked up a number of coaches from different places. And to be honest, the GAA, the Gaelic Club in Marfelt has become a bit of a hub, because you have you're sitting just outside the town. People come into the town, they're from all over the place. I mean, one of our main coaches is Westmeath. He came up to work in a local industry, and down he came just to see what was happening, and he got roped in. So we go literally looking for these people. And I come up against clubs sometimes and they tell me, oh, it's okay for you, we can't do this. But they're there somewhere. You'll find them there. People think because numbers are in a town, everything's sorted. Towns are anonymous. But in our situation, we literally went, it was a bit like selling tickets. You went to the door looking for people and convinced them to come down. So we would have a number of boys that coach at Rainy Rugby, and they're helping out at our underage too. Just happen to be parents, but we keep them there. Right, so quality equipment is next.
Yeah.
You got that?
Yep.
Right, so the quality equipment bit is sort of the club giving back to the coaches. In other words, if you get coaches on board, then you guarantee them quality equipment. I mean, whatever they need is usually got in Marfelt, one way or another. I mean, if you want the footballs, certain size, type, etc., literally pumps, the whole thing, portable goals. And there's a big stay put by this equipment has got to be good. It can't be. I mean, I remember going to a club in not name the county, where people said, "Oh, we're going well, etc." And they emptied this bag out for under 10s, and it had size 4 footballs, about 3 of them, and about 5 size 5s, and they must have been 20 years old. And I just looked at them thinking, not sure what's happening here. But the other bugbear that I would have had would have been bibs. People buying bibs. And then saying, oh, they'll do the under 8s, they're the under 16 ones, and there are kids coming down and it looks like they're wearing a dress. You know, so all those simple things, like make sure if you're going to ask coaches and say, listen, we'll be behind you, you give quality equipment for them to use. And we have always done that, and we'll continue to do it. Readiness is the next one.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's the reciprocal in that if you're going to give you quality equipment, then we want something from you. And if you're the coach, we want readiness on your behalf, we want readiness from you. And the readiness bit is have your sessions prepared, and have your sessions prepared simply, effectively, and involve the people that you've decided to include in your team. So there's no point having, you recruited 3 or 4 others and one of them is working and there's 3 of them leaning over a fence and maybe you need them just to move the goals at one stage, but there's better ways to use them. And we're into looking at those and exploring those and getting people. And literally, if you're going to be this lead, don't land down with your 2 arms at one length. Have the session prepared. And if you're stuck, there's plenty of resources there. All right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So coaching support. Now, if that's up on your screen, it'll have a yellow color.
The box around it, yeah.
I'll explain the yellow a bit later because it goes along with another one. But the coaching support can come in different ways. And over the years, it would have been, look, can you give me a drill? Can you give me, are there any drills to do this? Can we do that? What about a game? Have you got a game that works for that, or resources, etc.? And we would continue to do that. And they're everywhere, as you know now. I mean, the growth of drills and games, well, particularly games and whatnot, has been exponential. Any resources that they require, we'll give them plenty of support, workshops, advice on going to different courses, whatever. And in this last year, obviously, webinars galore. So there's plenty of coaching support, and I'll talk a wee bit more about coaching support on a slide that's coming up. So the next one is parents can and parents can't. You got that?
Yes, we have. Yeah,
So
it's up there.
I'm just going on a simple theme here. Years ago, whenever we started this idea of Rossa Oaks, we did sort of match players and band players and stream players, whatever way you want to talk about it, because numbers were big and we wanted, and I'll talk about it in a wee way. But what we told parents, and I was in charge of coaching at that stage, and what we said to parents in meetings and outside was, listen, you can expect high standards of coaching regardless of where your child is in the, not even what we'd call now maybe the pecking order, but where your child is in terms of experience and skill level. You can expect high standards of coaching. You're not going to get anything that is akin to, right, the A team is up there and there's a squad of them and they're getting something else, and you guys here throw a ball in among you and away you go. We literally reversed that at times. We put what we reckon were top people coaches down with the kids that were getting it toughest. And always the ones with a bit of crack. You had to have a bit of crack, as in they were great leaders. Marty D, for example, was a brilliant leader that way. I wouldn't say that he would know an awful lot about Gaelic coaching at the time, but he just kept the crack going and the kids loved him and responded, etc. So anyway, when you're doing that, you tell the parents they can expect high standards wherever they go in that club, particularly at that Go Games level. What they can't do is they cannot influence the coaching or where their child is to be placed. Okay. And that was spelled out to them at the start. And when I was in charge at that stage, and I'm no ogre, like, the basic story for me was, listen, if you have a problem, come to me. Don't go to the coaches. I'm the conduit. You come to me and I'll talk you through it and see. And rarely had we a situation. We had one, I'll give you an example of one that we had one time where I honestly thought I'd made a serious mistake in that we moved kids up into, as their skills got better. And one wee lad that I didn't know was in the same classes as 2 or 3 of his mates that had moved, was left behind. And we got the wrath of the parents over this thing. Well, I obviously took it as something that I had missed. But then I found out a few months later that from Sunday to Sunday, that youngster got nothing in terms of skills work or anything else anywhere other than our pitch. So if people are going to do that, they need to back it up by doing a wee bit of work with the children themselves, their own children. So we literally set out that parents could expect high standards, but they couldn't place their children. And as much as possible, that's the way we worked. Next one is another one of those yellow boxes, meaningful and enjoyment, isn't that it?
Yes, that's it. Right.
So the meaningful and enjoyment bit, I know there's a lot of talk about fun. Everything has to be fun and fun and fun. And I know it's one of those things that, yes, absolutely, I agree with, but people need to get an impression that it can't be good if it's not fun. I would prefer it to be that if you go down and you see the children playing there, that what they're getting is meaningful for their ability level and it's enjoyable. So there is a bit of crack, but there's a point to this whole thing. Yeah. In other words, we're here, we're not child-minded. There's not a crash where you sort of leave them and drive up the street and head off to Dunn's or something like that. This is not serious stuff, but it's meaningful stuff, right? So with that in mind, with the two slides, or the two yellow boxes, I want to take 2 slides just to cover those now.
Yeah.
Really sort of blind. If you go to the next one, that should be one that's got nearly like an advert on it.
That's the development plan, yeah.
So if you look at the left-hand side of that, you're not expected to see it on a screen unless you're looking at this thing on a huge TV. But I've then picked out things that go to the right. And you can see we attempted to do a wee bit more of coaching support. Now, I'll not pretend that this is ongoing. Obviously, COVID got in the way, but stuff got in the way before that. But we want to resurrect it again. So what we experimented with was the idea of running wee short workshop things that involved the coaches coming on a Friday night for 45 minutes into what we have up there called the McFlynn Suite. And it was just me, them, 45 minutes, and a topic taken every night, like translating from paper to pitch, or that idea of, are we coaching the game that we're actually playing, etc., etc. So the trick to all of this that we discovered was, when you bring coaches in like that, bring them in their management teams and let them sit in their management teams. Yeah. So what we did was, if you picture the scene, maybe 12 teams turned up, camogie, etc., etc. The seniors even came one night, the senior management, and they literally sat in their wee booths while maybe I did 10 minutes of a PowerPoint thing maximum, and then they went into discussion groups. But they discussed within their groups, as in, we're going to be working together next Tuesday on the pitch, so we're going to be discussing things together. Now, people might have said, but you narrowed the focus very much there. My point was, look, we actually got a working group that would be working together, and they were much more at ease. They could share wee bits and pieces, but there was no sort of death by feedback, as in, with 12 groups here and everybody gets 5 minutes to feedback. We were out of there, starting at 7, we were out of there 10 to 8. And they appreciated that brevity, but they also appreciated more than anything else, and more than I could have imagined, they sat in their own coaching teams and discussed their own problems. You get the idea? So that was basically it on that. So that's that slide with an idea to some idea you might have on coaching support.
Perfect.
The last slide of mine then is an unusual looking one. You got it there?
It is, yes, Phil.
So it's the one, you've just got a bear diagram there. Don't open it.
I have, yeah.
Right. So the bear diagram goes S and then D and then TG and CG, and they get bigger each time, and they're deliberately get bigger each time. So you've got this bit of ground, let's say, and you've got a player on each bit of ground, but in between that player, and it's the same player each time, is a bit of a gap. In some cases, it might be described as a chasm. And basically what you're looking at is, from left to right, if you're taking a skill like kicking, a technique, whatever, just a skill, kicking, that could be kick, passing, kicking over the bar, whatever, but just kicking. The S bit is the child working, or the player working in that in a static way, solitary, single, kicking against a wall, kicking against the side of the house, a garage, whatever it is, but they're practicing their skills, or that particular skill. The D bit is when you move that into a drill, an unopposed situation, and there's a bit of a gap for players to overcome there. And that gap for players to overcome is that chasm. So the coach can bridge that with them. And basically they're to get used to the fact that now you're building in movement to it. Now you're expected to get a bit of weight on the kick, etc. It's not just thumping it against the wall and it coming back. So there's wee things to be negotiated there, and it's tricky. The next jump is from performing drills to going into training games. So suddenly you've got opponents. You're trying to kick with somebody in your face. You're trying to kick with tacklers. You're trying to kick to the right person, and you have 4 or 5 mates all calling for it, etc. So it's a different prospect for a player to cope with a training game than it is to cope with something unopposed. And the last one is competition games. So you're not playing against your mates anymore. You're playing against somebody from another club, and the tackling is going to be harder, the speed of it's going to be quicker, etc., etc. Now, what's my point in all of this in terms of coaching? My point is, if you're going to make this journey that this player has in his or her kicking meaningful and enjoyable, just open up the top bit of it there.
I just have this second, Philip.
Right. So if you're going to do that, then we're asking our coaches, think about what's the best way to make that meaningful. So if it's Philip here and he's a player in the middle of it, he could cope very well with everybody in the group in the solitary bit or the static bit or in the drills bit that are unopposed, etc., etc. He'd be getting it tight in training games and he may not cope at all in competition games. But particularly, go back to training games, he may not touch the ball. So my point would be, all right, the child goes home and says, oh, it was really good, our team won, etc., etc. He's never going to tell the parent he never touched the ball. So we're trying mostly, or have been trying mostly, to think, what would be meaningful for that person, that player? Would it be that they would play in a different group for part of the session? And the answer would be yes. In other words, they would get 5 passes. They would get 5 receiving, or 6 times they got the ball, etc. But in the other game, where you might be saying it's all mixed ability and let's get into it, and let's keep it at mixed ability, etc., and let's not label kids, he's getting nothing. So the idea that we think is the greater of the two would be have him play in a situation where he's going to be able to use these particular skills in game situations which are tougher than just doing it in drills and solitary. So that's me.
Philip, thank you very, very much. Just to pick up there probably on your last slide, and again, something that's probably topical within the clubs in Down at the minute is that whole area of streaming. And look, you've explained your thoughts on it very well. That is something that to this day O'Donovan Rossa would still implement and practice.
We would do that, yeah, but there's flexibility with it, because I mean, I talked to some of our coaches today with a Rossa head coaches group, and some of them were saying, yeah, we have to change to do with who can cope with the competition a wee bit better, and others are saying, yeah, we did that last year, but we're now looking at the idea of just going with primary school classes this year. One of the things that we're working towards and experimenting with, and remember, when I say experimenting with, it's not there's a formal research project going on here. This is somebody who'd come to a meeting and say, would I tell you what I tried, and it works. So one of the things would be that if you have them split into, say, the yellows are playing the reds and the blues are playing the greens, but you know the blues are playing the greens aren't just as skillful as the other 2 groups that are up there, right? So they're playing away, but you find after a wee while, there's a child who's actually coming good. He's been doing work during the week, etc., etc. And over a few months, you move him up, but we never move down.
Yes.
So you're not sort of pointing out somebody who, like, you have to go up and replace Philip. He's coming back down here. Yeah. You're going up. And if somebody says, but surely then you'll reach a point when everybody will have gone up where there'll only be a few left. Well, once it becomes silly, move the whole thing up and start rejigging again. So there's plenty of opportunities like that. I'm always on to the fact that I would tend to call it matching rather than streaming. So, and the basis of it again is meaningful. Like some people have said to me before, right, here's a couple of examples. Well, in primary school, they're mixed ability. Yeah, well, I'm sure there's primary school teachers on there. I was a secondary school teacher, but I'm pretty sure that in primary school, you're not doing mixed ability, pure mixed ability and everything. You have a mixed ability class, but you've got about 4 reading groups in it. So again, if you're thinking, well, that's education, this is training, this is coaching, this is education too over a period of time. You've got to make it meaningful and enjoyable. And if somebody says, it's all right from our felt, you've 50, 60 kids, 40 kids in that group, we've only 8 under 8s. Well, my answer would be, all right, small numbers, keep them together for most of the exercises, and then match them up for others. So when you start going 1v1 and 2v2, don't be putting in some kid that just can't even toe tap the ball or bounce the ball and is only starting against your superstar, because it's going to be meaningless. Find the 2 that'll go 1v1 and make it meaningful. There's all sorts of wee ploys that you can do and work on the hoof. Perfect.
Philip, just on that sentiment that we're finishing on, I'm just going to launch one quick poll here before we move into the collective Q&A with the full panel. So again, this is back to everybody on the call, just in terms of that, and I like that term matching that Philip used there. So we'll use it as matching here as opposed to the streaming that we have in the question. But just quickly, just give us a wee bit of feedback on this most recent poll.
That's great, Connor. While you're doing that, can I ask Paraic and Aidan, hopefully they haven't went to bed at this stage, like, so if I ask Paraic and Aidan to come back in the chat, we're nearly at the end, folks. we just asked them to hold on for another 5 or 10 minutes. There's loads of questions submitted in advance, so we're only going to pick out a couple here and maybe ask the lads if we can just do a quick fire response on some of these burning questions. I think, Philip, you should be commended for that last presentation, because I think you did it blindfolded there, so that was a remarkable achievement there.
The way I fought for 35 years.
Yeah. So if we can get Paraic and Aidan back on the chat.
Yeah, we have the guys there. They're there, Carl.
Yeah, and just turn their cameras on.
They're all on there and ready to go, unmuted.
Okay, just a question is just around professional approaches. We see more and more of it within clubs. It's probably coming in more towards the later teen years, but it's probably being squeezed down year on year into other groups. So professional approaches like S&C, performance analysis, psychology, there's all sorts of things going on out there within the club environment. I suppose the general question is, do you think that those approaches within an amateur game outweigh, I think the positives around all that outweigh the negatives in terms of implementing some of those approaches? So we'll pass that round. If you want to go, Paraic, if you want to kick off, and we'll just do the same order, Paraic, Aidan, and Philip, just a quick response on that.
Okay, speaking as someone who is sort of working in a professional capacity with a club, I suppose the answer to that is value for money. Are you getting value for money, and could the money be spent somewhere else or in a better place? So Aidan talked about, employing a coach to go in 1 day a week in the 2 primary schools and in his catchment area. So would you be better off spending money on that as opposed to, bringing in, a fancy piece of software for stats or psychologist or nutritionist for the senior team? So it's weighing up the cost benefit.
Aidan?
Yeah, I suppose there's value in all of those things. It's a matter of priorities in terms of the time that you have with the kids. So things like psychology, for example, everybody who coaches has an input in terms of psychology, and communication is the first step with that, and the messages you deliver and how you deliver it and how you make the kids feel. And athletic development is something that's ongoing from the very first day you have them. And I suppose our approach is not having a whole pile of time, not necessarily a whole pile of expertise in the coaching teams either. It's to try and design sessions which incorporate bits and pieces of all of those things. And as you get older, then obviously we bring in expertise in things like S&C to try and support them. But it's whatever's needed and what's the priority in terms of our time with them.
Okay. Value for money. Philip, any thoughts around the...
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of professional in the sense of, organized and attention to detail, and those. We have a gym now that's second to none, and I'm sure there are loads of places like that. And as they go up, I know that you might think they spend too much time on it compared to what they do on the pitch, but they're necessary things. The whole professionalism of actual employment, it's one of the things that we're looking at in the Derry group at the moment, and that is we hope to come up with this shared resourcing package that you employ somebody in each of the clubs or even between the 2 clubs. And that person is going to be a GPO and a coach developer at the same time. So they have a dual role. They would really be working in your feeder primary schools as a GPO, but led by the club and county and paid for by the club and county. And then their role at the club would be coach developer rather than, you take on routines, or will you do such, you're paid here, will you do whatever. But they're going to be the coach developer as such.
Right. Connor, I'll stick with another question here, and then maybe if you finish with the last question. I know there's loads of questions in there. There's a few coming in there through the chat bar, but these probably summarize most of them. The next one's just on the I think it's sustainability and coaching plan year on year, and there's turnover of parents, committees, coaches, even yourself. You probably need to take time out yourself. I know the amount of energy and planning and into all this. Like, how do you go about addressing that within the club to ensure that it's the same level every year, because I think one of the commonalities around all this is that it's long-term, it's player-centered, and it's not about the immediate. So how do you get around that, or have you a wee snippet around resolving that? Paraic again?
I suppose the plan is the plan until the plan changes. So, you know, when the team start out, when they come out of nursery at under 8, we sort of ask them to put together a coaching plan for the year, and that's their plan. And obviously, we help them sort of give them the headings and, the various bits and pieces that have to go into the plan. But, we use then that plan to sort of do a half-year review and then an end-of-season review, and, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what you need to improve upon, and that informs the next year plan. And one of the things that has worked very well for us over the last number of years is handover meetings at the end of the year. It's sort of like the old speed dating, where the under 9 sit at the table and the under 10 sit at the table and the under 11 sit at the table and 12 and so on. And then, for the first half hour, the age group from below moves up to the table above, and they sit down and have a chat with the age group that went before them for half an hour. What happened? What did you include in your plan? What do you think we should do? What were the challenges? And then for the second half hour, it's reversed or whatever, and the team can so that everybody gets a chance to learn from the team above. And that's worked very well. And that's sort of, so the plan has sort of evolved and it grows, and it's sort of a living document from year to year, and it follows you. The idea is that it follows you through the club.
Yeah, very good. Aidan?
Yeah, this area is a challenge for us. We have a small pool of coaches, and more often than not, I would say certainly more than 50-60% of the time, parents follow their kids, and that means you do lose them when kids get to a certain age. I suppose the beauty of our environment is we can maybe try and coax people back in where there are gaps, try and keep them involved, whether it's nephews or another child coming or whatever else. But it is a struggle in the last 5 years for us. I suppose the constant has been the coaching committee, and we were very deliberate in terms of populating that committee at the outset and how we replenish it so that it spans a significant number of age grades. So almost all of the coaching committee are involved in coaching, right from under 7s as it is now, right through to minors and under 17, and we'll endeavour to try and maintain that so that the philosophy of coaching in the club stays consistent. But that is a challenge for us now, there's no doubt.
Yeah. I try to avoid the question of do you condone coaches taking their own children, but we always manage to squeeze it in somewhere.
Won't have coaches if we don't.
Yeah. Philip, any thoughts around that? Just how to sustain year after year?
We're not as progressive as Paraic. We haven't gone to speed dating yet, but we're quite traditional. But at the same time, we follow the same pattern that Paraic's talking about there, and that is we do an annual coaching review. And again, fairly similar, but I like Paraic's idea of people moving up in groups and going past each other, etc. And I'll probably explore that with them a wee bit more to find out, but we do review, and some great ideas come out of it, and some people have answers. So
very good. Connor, I think you're just going to finish with one question there, and I appreciate
if you don't mind, Carl, I just think when we have the three boys, I'm going to put one quick question to each of them, if that's okay. I'm going to take one that we had and two from the chapter, because there's a couple of very good ones. So first, Paraic here, just quickly, and there's a wee term in this that I absolutely love. Paraic, what different approaches are useful in dealing with energy vampires? Or those who always want to do things the way they were always done, that exist in every club?
I've never heard that term before, an energy vampire, so I'm going to steal that from tonight. I'm going to use that myself. I think I used energizers and energy sappers would be the one that I would have used in the past. I relate that back to one of the principles of it always asking why, and why are we doing this? Why is this the way we're going to organize this team this year? Whatever the question is. But if you keep asking why, and then the follow-on question is how can we do it better? You're sort of challenging people to think, is there a better way of doing it? And you're sort of moving away from, well, this is the way we've always done it. And I think the other thing, you never be afraid to benchmark yourself against, other clubs or against, other sports. pick a club or a sport that's something similar to yourself, and just figure out, and maybe they're successful. You figure out, well, what makes them successful? What do they do? And sort of benchmark yourself and compare yourself, and then from that you have an action plan to go in and work.
Super. Aidan, just one that we got directly focused for you. Could you ask Aidan or is there any indication that the new coaching philosophy plan in Dromintee is having any success at senior level at this stage?
Depends what you ask. No, listen, in terms of our feeder system for the senior team, which is obviously the objective, primary objective initially and ongoing, we're not there yet. So the kids that we would have started with are probably only 3, 4, at the most 5 years through that system in terms of come through our hands each year. So those kids are really at final year under 15. So yeah, we're probably 3, 4 years away from that.
Perfect. And last question then to Philip. Philip, do you promote within the club there the same management team taking the same group of players right up through the ages?
Yes, quite often. But then, more than anything, what's happened more than anything else is a manager will come along and say, "I think we've come to the end of our tether here. Yeah. They're not getting much more than us from us." So that happened to us now last year and the year before. Again, I'm not directly involved in the recruiting or whatever, but they'll come along and they'll say to youth officer and the coaching officer, "Look, I think that'll do us now. If we have to prompt something or think, well, a change would be best here, that may be one of those situations again where you have to headhunt. But there's no hard and fast rule. But most of the time, they move with them for at least 2 or 3 years. Yeah."
Perfect. Listen, Carl, I'm just going to quickly let everyone know, folks. The next week is going to be the last week of our ongoing webinar series. We're squeezing 2 into next week's programme because obviously the following week we are back on the pitches, and the last thing anybody will want to do any evening is sit online or looking at a computer screen. Next Tuesday night we have a webinar being delivered by Frank Quinn, who's the head physio from the physio group in Newry. He's going to focus on functional coaching practices for injury prevention in adult players. That's on Tuesday evening at 7:30. On Thursday evening, then, it's the final session 4 of our ongoing 4-part webinar series focusing on the new player development pathway within the GAA, where myself and Gareth Thornton will be joined by Owen McNichol, Conor Laverty, Ronan Sheehan and Danny Coulter for a discussion around coaching practices for players aged 13 to 16 years. So that's Thursday night. Both those webinars will be live tomorrow for registration on Eventbrite, and I will circulate the link to everybody who's on the call here this evening. Carl, do you want to say the thank yous and we'll get wrapped up?
Yeah, again, a lot of feedback coming in. Ideally, you would like to get all those answered, and if you're face to face, you could probably tackle a lot of those questions. But unfortunately, with this format, if we took every question and we answered it, we'd be here to midnight. So I know you just don't want to be here any longer than you need to be. So thanks to Philip, Paraic and Aidan, loads of insights. We lifted the lid a wee bit on some of the practices, common themes throughout, jotted down: people, planning, being structured, organised, and long term. And I think that was common throughout everybody's presentation. So thanks again. We'll probably revisit this format more towards the autumn as we return to play, but there will be some ongoing support through this. I think it is a useful platform as well to engage with the clubs and the relevant coaching officers within the club. So appreciate everyone that hung on, and hope you enjoy your evening.